He slid a $14,000 check across the polished mahogany conference table, like he was casually paying off a minor stain on an old office carpet. That single piece of paper represented 3 weeks of base severance pay for 24 years of continuous dedication. Zachary Croft, our newly appointed chief executive officer, tapped the crisp edge of the bank draft with one manicured index finger, maintaining a posture of absolute corporate indifference. This single piece of paper was the precise valuation they assigned to my entire professional career at 17 minutes past 4 on a humid Friday afternoon. Outside, a late summer storm drummed against the heavy glass windows of the executive suite, casting long shadows across the room. I did not reach across the table to grab the check. I simply stared at the printed figures, then shifted my gaze to Zachary's custom gold wristwatch, noting how the second hand swept forward with absolute indifference. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning system and the distant rumble of thunder. My name is Ronald Fletcher. I am 48 years old, and I spent 24 of those years building Apex Enterprise Solutions from a small four-person startup into a massive defense compliance infrastructure enterprise. Sitting inside the executive suite was our corporate human resources director, Evelyn Stone, who remained completely motionless in her chair, and our chief financial officer, Winston Barlow, who pretended to examine his financial spreadsheets as though this ambush was merely a routine accounting correction rather than a cold, calculated personal betrayal. Evelyn kept her eyes glued firmly to her yellow legal pad, as if avoiding eye contact could somehow absolve her of moral responsibility for the execution. She had been with the company for 12 years, and I had personally approved her promotion when the Human Resources Department expanded. Now she could not even look at me. Winston adjusted his silk tie with a heavy hand, his breathing shallow. He had joined us during the acquisition 2 years ago, bringing with him a cold, metrics-driven approach that viewed experienced professionals as expensive line items. Zachary, on the other hand, was 34 years old, hired by our parent holding company to streamline operations, which really meant purging high-earning veterans to make the quarterly sheets look more appealing to external investors. Winston Barlow cleared his throat with a dry cough, his fingers tapping nervously against his laptop keyboard. Legacy operational positions are simply too expensive for our current growth trajectory, Ronald, he said in a practiced, monotone voice that sounded like it had been copied directly from a generic corporate transition manual. We require younger, more agile energy as we transition into the upcoming fiscal quarter. Younger energy was the polished corporate euphemism board members routinely employed when they intended to purge senior executives over 45 years of age without openly acknowledging systemic age discrimination. They believed that younger managers would accept lower salaries, demand fewer benefits, and remain compliant in the face of questionable executive decisions. They chose to ignore the massive structural risk of removing the very technical architects who held the complete system knowledge. They saw the company as a collection of spreadsheets, completely blind to the complex engineering that kept their federal contracts active day after day. I had personally engineered our core system security framework, secured our most critical government client accounts, and sacrificed uncounted weekends, family holidays, and personal milestones to ensure our corporate platforms operated without a single regulatory breach. I remembered the early days when we slept on cot beds inside the server room, ensuring that federal data pipelines remained online during critical military deployments. Over 2 decades, I had written the foundational code, authored the security protocols, and established personal trust with federal compliance officers across the country. I knew every vulnerability in our systems and every requirement of our government mandates. The younger managers they wanted to bring in had never faced a federal audit, never had to explain system architecture to defense inspectors, and never spent 48 hours straight tracing a memory leak to keep a national security database from crashing. They wanted the rewards of our defense contracts without paying for the experience required to maintain them. "We will require your signed release document by 5 o'clock sharp," Zachary insisted, checking his watch with a smirk of dismissive arrogance that made my blood run cold. My late father worked on industrial manufacturing floors for 35 consecutive years, and he shared an enduring piece of advice with me when I first entered corporate management. Never permit a man in a tailored suit to rush you into a ruinous agreement. When someone tries to rush your signature on a Friday afternoon, it is never for your benefit. It is always because they fear what Monday morning will reveal. He used to tell me that true confidence never rushes, while panic always hides behind an artificial deadline. I looked at Zachary, then at Winston, and finally at Evelyn. None of them spoke. They simply waited for me to sign away my rights, believing that the sudden shock of the dismissal would paralyze my judgment and force me into a cheap settlement. I did not raise my voice, nor did I display any visible emotion or anger. I opened my leather briefcase, retrieved a clean sheet of heavy executive letterhead from my folder, and pushed their pre-printed severance release form to the far corner of the table. I will draft my own formal resignation instrument, I stated with quiet composure that seemed to catch them off guard. Zachary leaned back in his ergonomic leather chair, folding his hands behind his head with an amused expression. Write whatever speech helps you sleep tonight, Ronald. At 5 o'clock, your administrative credentials will be revoked, your security badge deactivated, and your position officially eliminated from our operational directory. He genuinely believed the maneuver was fully concluded. He assumed that orchestrating a public humiliation late on a Friday afternoon would intimidate a veteran professional into quiet compliance over the weekend, leaving the paperwork finalized before Monday morning. Back inside my corner office on that Friday afternoon, I locked the heavy glass door behind me and stood motionless for a brief moment, listening to the muted sounds of the office outside. I did not pack the framed family photographs from my desk, nor did I retrieve the crystal service plaque presented to me by my engineering division 3 winters ago. Instead, I opened the secure encrypted cloud server where my personal attorney, Beatrice Geller, and I had systematically maintained our executive record since Vanguard Holdings finalized their corporate acquisition 2 years prior. We had meticulously cataloged every employment addendum, every compliance memorandum, and every board meeting minute, not because I sought conflict, but because 24 years in executive management had taught me that corporate betrayal is always preceded by hubris. I knew the rules, and more importantly, I knew the specific legal protections built into my original employment contract. The formal letter I drafted was exactly one concise paragraph. It contained no emotional outbursts, no accusations of unfair treatment, and no mention of the thousands of uncompensated overtime hours I had logged over 2 decades of service. It contained only one precise, legally binding condition. My resignation would become effective if and only after full financial satisfaction of all change-in-control equity vesting schedules, executive bonus guarantees, deferred compensation balances, and statutory severance protections defined under our executed 1919 Executive Agreement and applicable state employment statutes. To an unobservant human resources manager like Evelyn, the document appeared to be nothing more than a routine formal resignation letter. At 3 minutes before 5 in the afternoon, I walked into the Human Resources suite and handed the single page directly to Evelyn Stone. She skimmed the opening line, caught the word resignation, and gave me the brief, uncomfortable nod people offer when they want an awkward situation to terminate immediately. We will process your final check for the 3 weeks and mail it to your home address early next week. Ronald, she said, still refusing to look up from her desk. Please ensure your general counsel reviews the complete text of the document before Monday morning. I replied calmly. Then I turned and walked out of the corporate headquarters. The automatic glass doors glided closed behind me with a soft pneumatic hiss, and as I stepped into the cool mountain air, I felt completely serene. Zachary and Winston believed they had unilaterally dictated my exit price. In truth, they had just executed a massive, binding financial invoice, and they lacked the operational intelligence to realize it before the weekend arrived. They thought they had saved the company money, but they had actually signed a blank check written in my favor. Saturday passed in absolute stillness across the corporate network, which revealed far more to me than any panicked email stream ever could. Had Zachary Croft and Winston Barlow properly planned for my operational departure, the transition sequence would have been orchestrated with seamless technical precision. Instead, my personal phone began vibrating continuously on my kitchen counter throughout. And Sunday, while I pruned the rose bushes in my garden and enjoyed a peaceful weekend, I intentionally refrained from answering every incoming call, not out of petty malice, but because I had spent the past 8 months explicitly warning the board that our cornerstone federal compliance bridge, known internally as the Sentinel Protocol, could not operate without cryptographically authenticated administrative sign-offs. They had locked me out of the system, and now the system was demanding my cryptographic signature to keep the security bridges active. The Sentinel Protocol was not merely an auxiliary software application. It was the primary secure compliance engine connecting Apex Enterprise Solutions to multi-million-dollar government contracts across defense and transportation sectors. It governed real-time security clearances, automated data integrity verification, and mandatory statutory reporting requirements for federal agencies. The platform processed millions of encrypted transactions daily, maintaining zero-trust architecture that satisfied strict federal oversight standards. Every federal contract required a certified primary technical authority to issue cryptographic validation tokens every 72 hours. Zachary had treated replacing an executive architect like swapping out a broken desk chair, assuming that a 26-year-old junior hire named Liam Mercer could manage complex federal compliance systems without appropriate security clearances, specialized training, or documented handoffs. Zachary had bypassed mandatory transition protocols, ignored statutory handoff requirements, and unilaterally revoked my root administrative access at 15 minutes past 5 on Friday evening. He had assumed that administrator access was merely a set of user passwords rather than an intricate multi-factor cryptographic architecture. He did not understand that the cryptographic tokens were bound to my official security clearance and could not be transferred without a formal, audited transition process. On Monday morning, I formally exercised my explicit contractual entitlement under our corporate employee handbook to utilize my accrued 60 days of unused paid time off. Under the conditional resignation agreement accepted and filed by Human Resources, my legal employment status remained fully active during this paid leave period while my settlement conditions were under review by corporate legal authorities. This strategic move protected my active employee status while preventing management from asserting that I had abandoned my position without notice. It also meant that any unilateral attempt to terminate my access or my benefits during accrued leave constituted an immediate breach of contract under state employment regulations, exposing the firm to severe statutory penalties. I knew that keeping my legal employment active left the burden of proof entirely on management. They could not argue that I was no longer an employee, nor could they argue that I had refused to work, since I was on approved leave. By Tuesday afternoon, the tone of corporate communications changed dramatically. The initial text messages from department managers had sounded mildly irritated, demanding immediate administrative password resets and system overrides. They quickly realized that there was no simple override for a federal security protocol. By midday Tuesday, however, the messages became increasingly frantic. The technical team was facing a complete shutdown. Sentinel Protocol handshake failed, one message read. Department of Defense portal throwing critical authentication errors, read another. Master security certificates locked out. Urgent system restoration required immediately. Federal contracting officers were now requesting emergency status updates regarding compliance outages, warning that administrative lockouts violated federal procurement standards. If the compliance bridge remained dark for another 24 hours, automatic statutory contract cancellation proceedings would initiate. This would result in the immediate loss of our primary government accounts, which represented over 80% of the company's annual revenue. The board would be forced to disclose the compliance failure to the public, destroying the company's valuation overnight. At 15 minutes past 2 on Tuesday afternoon, my mobile phone rang with an incoming call from Simon Beck, General Counsel at Vanguard Holdings, our parent corporate entity located in Boston. Chief legal officers at major national holding corporations do not make direct phone calls to departing subsidiary executives unless corporate assets are actively burning down. Mr. Fletcher, Simon began over the line, making a noticeable effort to maintain a calm, diplomatic tone. We appear to have encountered a temporary technical misunderstanding regarding the operational handoff of the Sentinel Protocol following your departure on Friday afternoon. I continued walking along the Red Rocks mountain trail, taking in the panoramic view of the red sandstone monoliths in the valley below. I am afraid I am currently unavailable for operational technical consultations, Simon. I replied with measured calm. A prolonged, heavy silence settled over the line before Simon spoke again, his voice dropping into a tense, measured tone. Ronald, we require your physical presence on an emergency technical consultation conference today. The security bridges for 3 primary federal government accounts are currently experiencing automated system lockouts. If these lockouts persist past 72 hours, federal contract regulations will mandate formal default notifications and immediate financial audit sanctions. According to the conditional resignation letter accepted and stamped by your Human Resources Department on Friday afternoon, my separation is not effective until my complete executive contract settlement is resolved, I explained patiently. Since your local management team revoked my administrative credentials and attempted to reassign my duties prior to satisfying those explicit financial conditions, I am currently taking my accrued statutory paid time off. I am simply adhering strictly to the operational terms your management team accepted. Simon exhaled slowly into his microphone, and for the first time in that conversation, the silence on the other end of the line sounded extraordinarily expensive. Be reasonable, Ronald, he urged, his professional composure starting to fray at the edges. We can certainly discuss minor administrative adjustments once the federal compliance portals are fully stabilized. I am being entirely reasonable, Simon, I replied softly, stepping over a small pine branch on the trail. I strongly encourage you to inspect the precise, binding text of the document your Human Resources Director accepted at 3 minutes before 5 on Friday afternoon. If you review the terms, you will find that any disruption of my role prior to the finalization of the settlement constitutes a constructive termination, which automatically triggers the acceleration of my entire compensation package. By Wednesday morning, the informal phone calls and text messages ceased entirely, replaced by an urgent written invitation to a formal executive video conference. I agreed to participate in the Zoom session on one non-negotiable condition. My lead employment counsel, Beatrice Geller, would conduct all discussions on my behalf. When the video stream connected at 10 o'clock sharp, Simon Beck was seated at the head of a massive mahogany conference table in Boston. Flanking him was Winston Barlow, our CFO, who looked visibly pale and uncomfortably rigid in his tailored suit. Zachary Croft was notably absent from the room, indicating that parent corporate leadership had already begun isolating him from legal strategy and damage control. They knew that Zachary's impulsive decision had created a massive legal liability, and they were trying to prevent him from making the situation even worse. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. I was sitting comfortably in my home study, while the corporate officers were sweating under the fluorescent lights of their boardroom. Ronald, Simon opened the session, placing his hands flat on the polished table. We have spent the last 12 hours conducting a thorough legal review of your 1919 executive employment contract and the conditional resignation instrument you submitted on Friday afternoon. I assumed your legal team would eventually complete their proper due diligence, I remarked calmly from my desk. Simon's jaw tightened slightly as he glanced at his open legal folder. Under the changing control provisions of your 19 executive agreement, if your position is eliminated or modified without cause following a corporate acquisition, all unvested equity options vest immediately, accompanied by 24 months of executive salary continuation and complete health benefit maintenance. He paused, looking at Winston, who looked as if he might throw up. This was the exact legal trap they had walked into. Beatrice Geller leaned forward into the camera frame before Simon could proceed further. Furthermore, Simon, because your local subsidiary management accepted Mr. Fletcher's conditional resignation letter, revoked his administrative access, and attempted to assign his compliance responsibilities to uncredentialed junior employees prior to resolving those stated terms, Apex Enterprise Solutions committed an undeniable constructive termination under state employment law. Your subsidiary also violated the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, known as the Warnin Act, under Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101, by attempting a structural executive reduction without serving 60 days advance written notice to affected executive personnel. She spoke with absolute authority, her voice calm and steady as she delivered the legal blow that shattered their defense. Winston Barlow shifted nervously in his chair and muttered an agitated comment off microphone before looking up at the screen. This total financial demand is completely outrageous. You are demanding $2,420,000 in direct cash payouts, accelerated equity liquidations, and legal fees. This is nothing short of corporate extortion. No, Winston. Beatrice responded with icy precision. This is the exact mathematical sum guaranteed under the executive agreement your board executed. Combined with statutory damages for age discrimination, under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 621, following your documented pattern of systematically targeting senior personnel over 45 years of age. We have cataloged 5 separate instances over the last 18 months where senior directors over 45 were forced out and replaced by underqualified junior staff at half the salary. In addition, under federal intellectual property statutes, specifically Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, unauthorized modification of Mr. Fletcher's proprietary compliance architecture carries severe statutory penalties, Beatrice continued, sliding a document into the shared screen view. We are prepared to file these formal complaints in federal court tomorrow morning if a complete resolution is not reached today. I looked directly at Winston through the high-definition monitor. You slid a $14,000 severance check across the conference table on Friday and claimed 24 years of building this firm's compliance foundation was worth 3 weeks of pay. What you were staring at today is simply the balance due on the invoice your own arrogance generated. You tried to economize on loyalty, and now you must pay for reality. A heavy silence descended over the Boston conference room. For 10 long seconds, both corporate representatives sat entirely frozen with the unmistakable expression people display. When they finally comprehend the vast financial abyss between a cheap, impulsive executive decision and a devastatingly expensive legal mistake. Simon Beck cleared his throat, adjusting his microphone with a trembling hand. What specific resolution terms will it take to resolve this matter comprehensively before our formal board audit disclosures on Thursday afternoon? He had realized that fighting the claim in court would not only cost millions in legal fees, but would also expose their compliance failures to the public, resulting in the immediate cancellation of their federal contracts. They had no choice but settle, and they knew it. By Thursday morning, the corporate dispute escalated into a full-scale operational catastrophe. Federal defense regulations mandated that any unexcused disruption to the Sentinel Protocol lasting longer than 72 consecutive hours triggered automatic statutory financial penalties of $50,000 per day, alongside mandatory notifications to federal contracting officers and regulatory oversight boards. The Department of Defense compliance officer had already issued a formal show cause notice, demanding proof of system security integrity by Monday morning, threatening immediate contract suspension if compliance bridges were not restored. Contract penalties were actively accumulating, threatening to erase the subsidiary's entire quarterly operating margin and trigger cross-default clauses across Vanguard Holdings' entire portfolio. The parent company's stock price was already showing signs of vulnerability as rumors of the compliance lockout began to circulate among industry analysts. At 11 o'clock on Thursday morning, Zachary Croft called my mobile phone directly. The condescending swagger and arrogant tone that had characterized his demeanor on Friday afternoon had completely vanished, replaced by unadulterated corporate panic. Ronald, you need to transmit the master administrative encryption keys to our technical division immediately, he demanded, his voice trembling with anger and desperation. If you refuse to provide administrative access right now, I will instruct our corporate legal team to file immediate criminal charges for withholding company property. You establish the precise financial worth of my professional services at 3 weeks of pay. Zachary, I replied smoothly, while pouring a fresh mug of morning coffee in my kitchen. I am no longer an active administrator, and I have no obligation to perform work while on approved paid leave. The automated administrative lockout your team is experiencing is a built-in security fail-safe triggered because your management team failed to execute the mandatory 90-day compliance transition plan I submitted to the board 3 months ago, I explained. You treated federal security protocols like arbitrary suggestions. If this situation escalates into a public federal contract default, I will personally inform the board of directors that you deliberately sabotaged our compliance network. Zachary yelled over the line, his voice cracking under the stress. You are certainly free to present that narrative to your board of directors, I responded in a soft, calm tone, and I will present the documented email trail demonstrating that you ignored 4 separate compliance warnings regarding system transition protocols because you were eager to eliminate senior executive payroll before the close of the 3rd quarter. I also have written records showing you directed Winston to suppress compliance audit reports to present false operational efficiency metrics to the parent company, I added, keeping my voice perfectly flat. The paper trail is unambiguous. Zachary, the telephone line went completely dead. For the first time since his arrival, Zachary realized that his executive standing was not collapsing due to external sabotage. It was crumbling under the weight of his own documented incompetence and fraudulent representations. He had tried to play the role of the ruthless corporate disruptor, but he had succeeded only in disrupting his own career. He was now facing the very real prospect of personal liability and professional ruin, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. By Friday morning, parent corporation leadership ceased treating the dispute as a minor subsidiary management issue. Teresa Kingsley, the chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings, arrived in Denver on her private corporate aircraft before sunrise. She did not contact Zachary or Winston upon arrival. She reached out directly to Beatrice Geller to arrange an immediate executive settlement conference at an upscale hotel downtown. When the conference convened at 9 o'clock sharp, Teresa Kingsley appeared on the screen alongside Simon Beck and an independent lead director from Vanguard's Internal Audit Committee. Zachary Croft was entirely excluded from the proceedings, a clear sign that he was being prepared for sacrifice. Winston Barlow sat in the corner of the room, looking like a man awaiting an execution. Mr. Fletcher, Teresa began, her voice crisp, commanding, and unencumbered by corporate platitudes. I have personally conducted an exhaustive audit of your executive contract files, your compliance documentation, and the age discrimination paper trail your legal counsel submitted. I now understand completely why this operational failure has become far more expensive than my local subsidiary executives reported. That is an accurate assessment of the reality, Miss Kingsley, I answered calmly, sitting beside Beatrice. We require the Sentinel Protocol restored and certified before national financial markets open. On Monday morning, Teresa continued, looking directly at me. I am fully prepared to authorize the complete contractual settlement payout of $2,420,000, including all accumulated legal expenses. However, I will not allow a departing subsidiary executive to dictate internal corporate governance or executive board assignments. I leaned forward, looking directly into the camera lens. Miss Kingsley, if Zachary Croft remains in operational authority at Apex Enterprise Solutions, your holding corporation will learn nothing from this crisis. My former technical division will continue working under constant threat of arbitrary retaliation, and your board will inevitably face another catastrophic compliance failure. The next time he decides to eliminate a senior professional to inflate short-term profit margins. The conference room fell into complete silence. Teresa analyzed my expression for several moments, then turned to hold a private, unmuted consultation with her audit committee director. She was a seasoned executive, and she knew that a manager who creates a $2 million liability is no longer an asset. When she returned to the microphone, her posture had shifted from defensive corporate posture to decisive strategic calculation. Seasoned corporate leaders do not defend failing subsidiary executives once those executives transform into unmanageable financial liabilities. I will not publicly terminate a sitting subsidiary chief executive officer under external demand, Teresa declared with calm authority. However, effective immediately, Zachary Croft will be placed on mandatory, indefinite non-operational administrative leave pending an expedited forensic accounting audit of his division. And who will assume interim operational direction over the technical division? I inquired. That depends entirely on whether anyone within your current subsidiary organization possesses the technical competence required to stabilize our government contracts, Teresa responded. Owen Brady, I answered, without a moment of hesitation. He has served as senior systems architect for 14 years. He thoroughly understands the Sentinel protocol infrastructure. He commands the complete respect of the entire technical staff, and he possesses the specialized knowledge required to resolve the federal compliance lockouts. And before you inquire, yes, he was also placed on Zachary's prospective payroll reduction list last month. Teresa glanced down at her audit documentation, her pen hovering over the page. Owen Brady turned 41 years old last month, did he not? Yes, he did, I confirmed, which appears to represent the exact demographic age threshold your local subsidiary management targeted for systematic elimination. Teresa nodded once with absolute finality. Owen Brady will be appointed Interim Director of Technical Operations effective immediately. Zachary Croft will be escorted from the building and the full settlement terms are approved. The finalized executive settlement documentation arrived in my electronic inbox at 15 minutes past 6 on Friday evening. I thoroughly reviewed every clause alongside Beatrice Geller. A total financial recovery of $2,420,000, complete reimbursement of all legal fees, a glowing, neutral employment reference letter executed by Teresa Kingsley herself, formal written confirmation that my departure was entirely without cause, and a binding, mutual, non-disparagement covenant protecting my professional reputation. The settlement agreement also included explicit indemnification clauses protecting me against any future operational claims related to the Sentinel protocol transition. Once all formal signatures were executed, I authorized the secure transmission of the Master Administrative Transition Package. I did not send the encryption keys to Zachary or Winston. I transmitted them directly to Owen Brady through our encrypted technical channel. I included detailed operational handbooks and step-by-step restoration instructions to ensure a flawless certification process. 9 minutes later, my mobile phone rang. It was Owen, his voice trembling with deep emotion and profound relief. Ronald, he choked back tears over the line. The Sentinel protocol is completely operational. Every federal compliance portal is showing green status across the board. Teresa Kingsley just called me personally to confirm my official appointment as Interim Operational Director. The Department of Defense Compliance Officer has already withdrawn the show, cause notice. The team is safe. I leaned back in my armchair, watching the evening sunset over the Rocky Mountains, feeling a deep sense of peace. Take a deep breath, Owen, I advised warmly. Now go back inside and take excellent care of our engineering team. They were secretly planning to eliminate my position. Next Friday afternoon, Ronald, Owen admitted softly. I know they were, Owen. We took care of it together, I replied. A long, meaningful silence settled between us. A quiet bond grounded in 24 years of shared professional integrity and the enduring victory of truth over corporate arrogance. I knew that the engineering team was now in safe hands, and that the culture of fear Zachary had tried to establish was permanently dismantled. I had not only secured my own future, but I had protected the people who had stood by me for decades. 6 months later, I was enjoying an espresso at a quiet sidewalk cafe, 3 blocks from our former corporate building when I observed Liam Mercer walking down the street. He appeared exhausted, his head lowered, completely lacking the cocky posture he had exhibited when Zachary first introduced him as the future of modern digital management. "Ronald?" Liam asked, stopping beside my table with a hesitant posture. "May I sit down with you for a moment?" "Please join me, Liam," I invited politely. "How are operations progressing at Apex Enterprise Solutions?" Liam let out a deep, weary sigh as he sat down across from me, placing his briefcase on the floor. "Owen completely restructured the entire technical division," he explained, his voice low. "The company is performing exceptionally well now, but the entire corporate culture transformed after your departure. What eventually occurred with executive management?" I asked gently, taking a sip of my espresso. Liam shook his head in absolute disbelief. "The forensic audit ordered by Teresa Kingsley uncovered that Winston Barlow had intentionally manipulated third-quarter financial projections to manufacture artificial justification for purging senior payroll. Winston resigned under immediate threat of federal fraud prosecution, and Zachary was formally terminated by the board of directors without a single dollar of severance. They lost everything." Liam paused, staring down at his coffee cup with genuine remorse. "I wanted to offer you my sincere apology, Ronald. When Zachary hired me, I foolishly believed I was selected because of my superior modern qualifications. The painful truth is that I was brought in because I was cheap, pliable, and naive." "You were never the underlying issue, Liam," I reassured him kindly. "You were simply a temporary instrument utilized by unethical corporate leadership." Liam looked up at me with profound respect before standing to leave. "Nobody at the headquarters speaks about that Friday afternoon. As if you were defeated, Ronald. They talk about it as the legendary day Apex Enterprise Solutions finally learned the true cost of disrespecting experience." I watched him walk back toward the glass corporate tower, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment that the narrative of my career was finally restored to its true standing. I did not retire from executive life in defeat. I simply stopped donating my time, loyalty, and vital expertise to corporate leaders who believed human dignity came cheap. Today, I operate an independent executive consulting practice, guiding senior leaders through complex employment contracts, protecting intellectual property rights, and enforcing executive agreements before corporate boards attempt to exploit them. My late father was entirely correct in his wisdom. True authority does not need to shout. It speaks with quiet, unyielding precision, supported by unassailable legal preparation and unwavering self-worth. They pushed a $14,000 severance check across a mahogany table for 24 years of loyalty. 5 days later, that single act of corporate disrespect cost them $2,420,000. Respect offered freely builds enduring institutions. Respect exacted through unwavering legal resolve creates a lasting standard that corporate arrogance can never destroy. I took a final sip of my espresso and smiled, ready for the next client meeting. My invoice had been paid in full, and my legacy was secure.